Dr. O here with the endocrine system. Hormones are chemical messengers. They make things happen, and working together with the nervous system, they produce and maintain homeostasis, a relative balance of structure and function. Here are several videos you can take a look at that will give you a comprehensive understanding of hormones. What is a hormone and what is the endocrine system, and then pair up glands with hormones. We've done a lot of that, spent a lot of time in lecture doing such, and distinguish between endocrine and exocrine glands. So, the pituitary gland produces hormones, many of them. All right? The hypothalamus has an endocrine function. The thyroid gland produces thyroid hormones. The pancreas produces insulin and glucagon, and the adrenal glands produce stress hormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, the stress hormone, as well as other hormones such as aldosterone. The sex glands, such as the ovaries and testicles, produce their sex hormones. In the male, testosterone; in female, estrogen and progesterone. Hormones produce chemical stimulation. All right, distinguish them from a nerve, where nerves are electrical, and only at the end of the nerve, the synaptic terminal, will a neurotransmitter, which is a kind of hormone, be released into the synapse and then make things happen. So nerves are largely electrical. Hormones are chemical messengers, and they make things happen within the body. Distinguishing between an exocrine and endocrine gland. Exocrine, exo means to leave, to emit. So here we've got a sebaceous gland on your skin, squirts out sebum, which is an oily fluid that helps lubricate and protect the surface of our skin, keep it pliable. Versus the endocrine glands, here's the glandular tissue in the center, and there's a little factories that produce a given hormone. Let's say it's thyroid hormone. Jumps right off into the blood supply and travels near and far, making things happen. Contrast, compare between male and female anatomy and the hormones produced. Largely the same with the exception of the sex hormones. The neuroendocrine system. Neuroendocrine system is comprised of various nerve structures and hormones that work together, making the neuroendocrine system. It's like the composer of a symphony that is every cell, tissue, organ, and system in the body. Nerves and hormones together control it. Some nerves can make hormones, can talk to a gland and make a hormone release. And some hormones, when they're in circulation, will produce a nervous stimulation. Here's an example of the nervous and endocrine systems. Compare and contrast. Nerves are electrical. Hormones travel in the blood. Nerves can squirt out neurotransmitters. Hormones are produced by glandular tissue. The release of a nerve cell that pretty much plugs in like an electrical cord to an outlet, versus an endocrine system. Hormones, they're distributed far and wide, and they can travel in the bloodstream wherever they like and interact, producing changes. Nerves are fast, hormones are relatively slow, and the duration, lasting effects of a nervous impulse is short. It's like an electrical impulse, versus the endocrine system, where hormones can have a prolonged action in their target tissue. Reflexes. Here we've got a mother, she's lactating. There, as the baby latches on, there are structured, that stimulation to the nipple is going to stimulate the hypothalamus, which is going to release some oxytocin into the posterior pituitary gland, which is going to, that hormone oxytocin, the hug hormone, the cuddle chemical, is going to communicate with the mammary tissue, produce more milk, and allow it to leave the breast and feed the child. This is an example of a positive feedback loop. Be able to define a hormone, provide some examples of hormones, Know that there's short and long-term effects, provide examples. And remember, there's a lock and key mechanism that plays a role in the hormone receptor interaction there. So hormones are powerful molecules. They're chemical messengers, and they're going to mediate body functions by carrying these hormones from different glands to target cells. Turn it off. Functions of hormones. There are short-term changes produced and long-term changes. An example of a short-term change is your heart rate. The hormone epinephrine or adrenaline can get your heart pumping, will open up your lungs, it will manipulate body fluids and your metabolism or your energy level. And these things are going to be, again, short-term. They'll fluctuate depending upon the hormones circulating. Long-term changes. Some hormones are going to determine bone being laid down or bone being leached out of bone, calcium being leached out of bone and used throughout our body chemistry. So hormones regulate things, they activate, they do things out in our anatomy and physiology. They control things like a conductor of a symphony. There's some hormones like growth hormone and thyroid hormone and insulin, and they're going to affect a lot of tissues, whether it's muscle, whether it's nerve, whether it's an epidermis. They'll have effects on a lot of tissues, and some hormones are more specific, like thyroid stimulating hormone is going to do one thing, and that is to communicate to the thyroid gland that it needs to make up its manufacturing of thyroid hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, produced by the anterior pituitary, that master gland. That adrenal hormone is going to communicate to the adrenal glands and tell it to do its work. How does it do it? Hormones are going to be excreted by their glandular tissue and then released into the bloodstream, and then they decide whatever path they take, they can drop off along the way, get out of the pool, and link up with a specific cell that has a receptor for the hormone. That's very key, pun intended. There's a lock and key mechanism that has to do with the hormone linking up with its receptor. In the absence of sufficient numbers of receptors, the key will not fit. If there's no lock, you can't stick the key in it, and it won't open the door. So, hormones, lock and key mechanism, very specific. Different type of hormones. There's tropic hormones that are going to communicate to other glandular tissue to produce their hormones. So an example of that is adrenocorticotropic hormone is produced in the anterior pituitary, but there's going to be a little messenger from the hypothalamus that says, hey, make some adrenocorticotropic hormone. So some hormones are going to speak to a specific glandular tissue and tell it to release other hormones, while non-tropic hormones are going to just be a gland that releases its particular hormone, like the thyroid gland releasing thyroid hormone. Okay? And there's anabolic hormones. They stimulate growth in tissues. And then there are catabolic hormones. An example of that is cortisol or cortisone, which some people get injected into their joints when they're painful and inflamed. And that's going to reduce swelling and tissue growth. Hormones are made of different things biochemically. So some hormones are steroid derived, and ultimately they're made of cholesterol, a cholesterol base. So here's an example of that right here. Cortisol, the stress hormone, ending with the suffix -ol. That's your cue that it's a steroid derived hormone. Other hormones are made of proteins, and proteins are made of chains of these amino acids, the building blocks, right? So just know that hormones can be made of different things. And hey, look, this is the inside of the cell, and we've got all of those structures within the cell that do their specific jobs. So nucleus is going to cause protein synthesis, and the rough endoplasmic reticulum is going to make proteins, and the protein, they're going to be sent to the Golgi apparatus. They're like the FedEx guy and package them up And in here, look, we're going to release it outside the cell. So proteins or hormones are manufactured within the cell, and all of those organelles, was the word I was looking for, are going to play a role. Hormones are transported in different ways. Sometimes they are bound, like they have an escort, and other times they just circulate unbound without an escort throughout the body. Feedback, remember that negative feedback loops are widespread within the anatomy, and in the process of homeostasis, there's going to be a lot of negative feedback. All right, negative feedback means that the action is going to oppose the way things are going. So if the blood sugar is low, negative feedback loop is going to release glucagon, and glucagon is going to increase your blood sugar levels, right? Blood sugar levels are high, your pancreas is going to release insulin, which will drop the glucose down lower and put the fuel into the cell, sugar, glucose. Positive feedback, oxytocin, one of the examples. Also, the process of labor. Hormones are going to fluctuate, we all know that, dictated by the various neurological structures that control them and monitor them, such as the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Target gland will also offer feedback. Hormones can travel in and between cells through the various structures like gap junctions, and in the bloodstream is the most common throughout the circulation. Remember, the glandular tissue produces the hormone, releases it right into the bloodstream. Neurotransmitters at the end of the nerve are a type of hormone that are released by nerves. Once we reach the target cell, the hormone must pair up with a receptor, or it's not going to accomplish its goal. So the target cells represent the end zone using our football analogies, and the receptor would be our uprights, our goalposts. The secreting cell is going to communicate that hormone. It'll drop into the circulatory system and then link up at the target tissue via a receptor. Must have receptors. They're very specific, and they have a lock and key relationship. Think of receptors as a switch turning on a light. Process called enzyme amplification. Remember, we have a beaker full of chemical reactants, and we want to accelerate our product. If we sprinkle the little magic enzyme in there, that's going to increase exponentially the rate of reaction, because it's what you call a catalyst, and the hormone will be that much more potent. So process is called enzyme amplification. We're going to amplify the effect of the hormone. Upregulation of and downregulation of receptors. If we downregulate the receptors on a particular cell, there's not going to be any, there will be comparatively less receptors for the hormone to bind to. All right? If we upregulate the number of receptors, we're increasing the receivers out there on the playing field for the hormones to interact with. So upregulation increases the number of receptors, downregulation decreases the number of receptors. And we want a lot of receptors. Some hormones work together. Some hormones oppose one another's actions. Synergy is when hormones work together and have a net effect. Antagonistic effects would be, an example of that would be insulin and glucagon. Insulin would decrease blood sugar, and glucagon would increase blood sugar. Hormones are recycled. Nothing is wasted in the body. All right. So there are different organs within the body that help detoxify and recycle chemical substances. The liver and the kidney are notable in that regard. Some hormones have a metabolic clearance rate that will be shorter or longer depending upon the hormone itself and its chemical composition. So the metabolic clearance rate of adrenaline, epinephrine, right? The stress hormone that gets your heart rate up, is, let's say it's going to take a half hour for that chemical hormone to be completely depleted in your body and recycled into its constituent parts. That means your heart rate's going to be up until that hormone has dissipated. People think about hormones, they think about people being moody. Well, people are moody when their blood sugar levels rise, for instance, and they need to maintain homeostasis. So here's an excellent diagram of what happens when the blood sugar is elevated. Insulin will be released by the pancreas, which will bring the blood sugar down to a more reasonable level. And if blood sugar plummets too greatly, glucagon will be released, and that will tap into resources in the skeletal muscles as well as the liver. There, glucose is stored as glycogen. And glycogen can be broken down and used as fuel, boost the blood sugar up, give you energy.